Thank you for listening to the Red Eye podcast. You guys are why we do this. We love the stories that you have, and we love telling you the stories that people share with us. To help us reach more people and get the podcast really out there, we would really appreciate it if you left a review. It just helps our podcast be a little bit more visible. Thank you. Sometimes at the Red Eye, we're handed a story that isn't quite a story at all. It's more of an event, something that happened kind of thing. Something that makes us laugh out loud and then immediately wonder how on earth we're going to spin it into something long enough to share with you, while knowing that we really, really want to. Now, sometimes those little moments get folded into a bigger tale, but other times our writer is left imagining the rest, reconstructing what might have led up to said event, drawing on her own experiences and those of colleagues, and slipping into the subject's shoes to bring it to life. Today's story, you've probably guessed, is going to be one of those times. But we are going to do it a little differently to others because today I'm going to give you the punchline first, the moment that had us wide-eyed and dumbfounded, and then we'll take you on the journey we imagined led to that moment. And one last thing before we dive in. The flight we have imagined may not have happened exactly as we tell it, but that doesn't mean that the events themselves have not actually played out at another time. To us, or to our friends and colleagues. As we always say, it is the things you think could not possibly be true that really are. And in this job, nothing is ever too crazy. Doors to armed and cross-check. Come fly the Red Eye! Welcome aboard the Red Eye. A hotel lobby in Africa, 9 a.m. The crew were trickling down slowly, the lift doors parting every few minutes to reveal one bleary-eyed flight attendant after another. Adrian stirred his coffee and sat on the sofa, firing up his company device to see what he had in store for the day. He loved this route. The flight was one of their shortest long hauls. There was no time difference, and it was a day flight home, which meant he could get straight into home life without having to recover first. It had its challenges, but once you understood the people, stopped trying to win arguments and just let the perception of rudeness and the level of demand go over your head, it was easy. Give them what they want, be friendly, and let the rest roll off you. That was what he told his crew in every briefing. Some got it and survived the flight with a smile on their face. Others didn't. But, he thought with a shrug as the flight details flashed up, you couldn't save them all. Some people needed to work things out for themselves, and others never would. Meanwhile, he'd just keep requesting these flights, and they could go kill themselves chasing glamour and nursing jet lag. Morning, boss. Adrian looked up to see Steve taking a seat across from him, a croissant balanced precariously on the side of his cup and saucer. Morning, mate. How's the head? They'd had a few beers by the pool last night, but Adrian had ducked out early. All good, Steve grinned. All tucked up by 9 p.m. Don't worry, I'm ready and raring. Adrian smirked. Steve was a fellow route lover. He knew how to play these. The lift doors chimed open once again, and both men turned instinctively to see who was appearing next. But it wasn't anyone in uniform. And Adrian looked away briefly before something made him turn back. The girl was familiar. And so was the luggage she was pulling. He was sure that she was crew, and yet in the early hour, his brain couldn't grasp why she wasn't in her uniform. She walked towards them slowly, not looking up, until she was alongside. Daisy? Adrian said, recognising the new girl now, the one who was on her third flight. She had struggled somewhat on the way out, hadn't coped well with the culture difference, and there had been some drama with a dirty diaper, but she seemed okay when they got off, hadn't she? But now she looked back at him with a flash of something in her eyes, a sort of defiance that he couldn't understand. Are you okay? She nodded, but didn't speak. Her jaw was visibly clenched. Adrian stood up now, clasping his hands in front of him as he waited for an explanation, which didn't come. Are you sick? He asked eventually. Daisy just shook her head, but still said nothing. Adrian racked his brain for the question that might lead to the answer, wondering how long they could have this standoff. Has something happened at home? He tried. Daisy shook her head again. So, can I ask why you aren't in uniform? He asked cautiously. Daisy took a deep breath. I'm fine. I'm just not working home, she said, flat and blunt. Adrian blinked. Certain he'd misheard. He glanced at Steve, who was staring at her with the same wide-eyed confusion. Sorry, can I ask why? Adrian managed, his mind scrambling for what on earth she was about to say. Daisy swallowed, then squared her shoulders like she was bracing for battle. Because the flight out was horrendous, and my mum said I didn't have to work home, she blurted, words tumbling out in a rush. And with that, the conversation was over. Daisy, the brand new crew member, turned on her heel, fetched herself a coffee and croissant from the table, and sat by the door as if nothing in the world were amiss, ready to ride the crew bus to the airport, not as cabin crew, but as a passenger. Adrian stood, frozen, his mouth slightly open. His mind reeled with the implications. No message to crew control, no thought for the team now a man down, no ticket for the flight she so clearly expected to be carried on. And certainly no grasp of the paperwork and frantic calls he'd now have to make. Daisy Spencer had just stood herself down without so much as a word to her manager, her captain or crew operations, because, in Daisy Spencer's world, the only opinion that seemed to matter was her mother's. Wow, Adrian muttered under his breath. He turned to Steve, who was still sitting, stock still, croissant frozen halfway to his mouth, stunned into silence. Adrian exhaled, shaking his head slowly. Daisy Spencer's mother, he said grimly, has a lot to answer for. The previous day. Hi, I'm Daisy. The girl breezed into the briefing room without so much as a knock, interrupting the pre-brief Adrian and his purser were having. They both looked up at her, letting the interruption slide in lieu of an explanation. It's my third flight, and I've been told these flights can be really hard down the back, so can I possibly work in business class? She asked, as if it were a completely reasonable request. Adrian blinked as he took it in. In front of him was a girl who looked no older than 15, promoting herself already to the business class cabin because she'd heard it was hard down the back. He kept the smile on his face and swallowed his laugh. I'm sorry, Daisy, but you need to work down the back, I'm afraid, like everyone else does in their first 6 months. It might be hard, it might not, but we all just need to get on with it and do our best, okay? He watched as her face dropped, like she wasn't used to not getting her own way. Okay? He asked again. She nodded. But if it gets too much for me, my mum said I can ask if I can sit it out for a bit, get myself together if I feel overwhelmed. Adrian opened his mouth and then closed it again, lost for words. He looked at his purser, who was suddenly finding the floor fascinating, and then back at the girl, who seemed to think that she should have some special treatment because her mum said so. You can sit down if you're on a break, Daisy. Other than that, I'd expect you to pull your weight like everyone else, he said deliberately. His annoyance wavered when he saw her eyes begin to well up. Oh, she was just a baby, and somehow she'd landed herself a job that called for grown-ups. Daisy, he said kindly, these flights are busy, yes. There is a cultural difference, yes, but if you're polite and give the passengers what they want, then you'll be absolutely fine. And, he added with a grin, trying to find an angle that might help her, you only need to survive for 6.5 hours. Just keep watching the time and ticking it off, all right? Daisy nodded and blinked back her tears before leaving the room. Jesus Christ, Adrian sighed with a shake of his head as the door closed behind her, looking at his purser, who had given in to a fit of giggles. What the hell is going on with our recruitment lately? Daisy stood manning the L3 door, watching the chaos unfold, and reminded herself that this was supposed to be what she'd always wanted. Since her very first flight at the age of 3, when the beautiful air hostess had smiled at her, she'd dreamed of doing this job, and so she'd made it happen. Straight out of college, she'd padded out her brief supermarket job on her CV to make it sound like a real customer service experience, and then her mum's best friend, Auntie Sil, had drilled her for weeks before the interview. Sil had worked for the airline for almost 20 years, and although she had left a long time ago, she still had friends in recruitment. Daisy had arrived at the assessment centre armed with perfect answers to every possible question, speaking about challenging situations she'd never truly faced. And of course, she'd got the job. But the Daisy who had been hired was a far cry from the one standing here now, pressed against her door, avoiding the glare of a woman who had just hissed at her and called her over with a dagger-like fingernail, demanding her attention. She couldn't leave her door, even if she wanted to. It wasn't allowed. Around her, the boarding scene had descended into bedlam. Passengers shouted over the lack of locker space, though Daisy could see they'd all dragged on far more than the allowance permitted. It was their fault. Yet somehow the crew were left to sort it out. Both aisles were clogged with bodies and bags while her colleagues slowly worked their way forward, twisting and turning cases, juggling the puzzle of overhead bins, and somehow, impossibly, they were smiling through it all. Smiling. Something Daisy found harder with every passing minute. No, Daisy couldn't smile because she was actually afraid. She could hear the anger in their voices as they tussled with their bags, with their seats and with each other. She looked down at the floor and imagined they weren't there. Until she couldn't. Until a lady at least 3 times her size stood so close in front of her that her toes were touching her own. "Why am I separated from my children?" she demanded. Daisy looked up at her, reluctantly, accepting that she was cornered and that she was going to need to deal with this one. She pulled her company device out from her jump seat, knowing already that the flight was full and she'd struggle to move anyone, but that she had to be seen to at least try. "How old are your children, madam?" she asked as she scrolled through the rows of full seats. The lady flicked her braids behind her and looked away, her face stony. "Around 9. Daisy frowned, wondering why she was so vague. "And, where are they?" The woman extended a taloned finger toward the middle rows. Daisy followed the gesture and found 3 boys sitting together, all in one row, all staring back at them. Except they weren't boys. One had a full beard, another a sparse moustache, and the youngest still looked at least 15. But she knew not to say anything. "And, where are you sitting?" she asked instead, keeping her tone neutral, she thought. 45A, said the woman. Another swish of her hair, another stab of entitlement. Daisy scrolled quickly through the manifest on her screen. It was just as she thought. Every seat was full. There was no magic solution. "I'm afraid it is a full flight, madam," she said, forcing her voice to stay even. "Perhaps you can ask someone nearby to change seats so that you can be closer to your, Her eyes darted once more to the row of young men. Children. The woman narrowed her eyes, as though Daisy had personally insulted her, then folded her arms with a huff loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. Daisy shrank back against the L3 door, her pulse thudding in her ears. "No." The words stretched out as the woman shook her head and jabbed a lacquered nail towards Daisy's chest, forcing her to fold backwards into the cold metal of the door handle. "You ask them." Daisy's throat tightened, and her fingers fumbled behind her, gripping the handle. For one terrifying, irrational moment, she imagined pulling it, imagined blowing the slide and jumping out and away from the pressure, the noise, and the anger. "How can I help here?" The purser's calm, measured voice cut through the tension like a blade. He appeared at Daisy's side, not a moment too soon, his presence filling the space with an authority Daisy could not yet fake. The woman's hand, still raised, slowly dropped as the purser fixed her with the kind of smile that was polite but immovable, and relief washed over Daisy. She didn't open the door, didn't blow the slide, and she didn't get off the plane. But more than once in the hours that followed, she would wish that she had. There was vomit. And there was a lot of it. It had filled the sink in one toilet, covered the aisle on one side, and poured from a child's mouth into his seat pocket and over the armrest of the person in front. Daisy could smell it as she walked to the front, and it made her stomach turn. But despite it, she was finally feeling calm now that the dinner service was over. Never in her life had she experienced anything like it, and the supermarket had come nowhere near to preparing her. It was as if the whole complimentary food and drink service was too much for some of them to cope with, and they wanted 5 drinks, 3 meals, and more. But she had to keep her smile on, kept watching the time tick by because, as Adrian had said, all she had to do was survive. And now, with one meal just served, which had taken double the time to deliver than was normal, here she was, hauling up a dirty cart to the front to swap it over with the clean one, ready for the next service in just an hour's time. Daisy ignored the call bells, pretended she didn't hear the hisses, and wrinkled her nose as she passed the front row of economy, where her mother was changing her disabled son on the seat. She breathed in the calm of the front galley for a split second before the fresh cart was rolled towards her, and off she went again to the back. No time to stop. No time to rest. She pictured herself in crew rest, on a beach, in a bar, or anywhere but here, as she rolled back past the child whose diaper had just been changed, barely flinching at the sour smell of feces. It followed her down, past the vomit, mixing into a perfumed concoction of bodily fluid. She was becoming strangely immune to it, she realised, desensitized by the overstimulation of all her senses so far. Still they called her, tried to stop her for another drink, another meal, another whatever it was she could get them, and still she ignored them. Something under her wheels tried its best to slow her down, probably one of the blankets that had been covering up the vomit, but she pushed the trolley harder, determined to make it to the back before anyone managed to catch her. She wheeled the cart into the galley, forcing it over the carpet trim with extra effort, wondering if the wheels were shot and if the cart needed tagging. "Oh my God, what the hell is that smell?" the purser exclaimed as Daisy pushed past him. Daisy shrugged, incredulous. Had he not noticed it until now? Had he somehow missed what she'd already endured out there? Mind you, she thought, sniffing cautiously. The smell did seem stronger here in the galley. Something had clearly gone on while she'd been away. And then her eyes dropped to the floor, and horror froze her in place. There it was. The source of the cart's resistance and the odour that had invaded the air. Around the wheel, nearest her right foot, was a diaper. Shredded and leaking, its brown contents spilling over the floor. It must have been in the aisle and she'd rolled over it, bringing it the whole way to the back with her. Daisy stared in disbelief as she realised the extent of the mess. Her shoe was coated, and the track of filth extended down the aisle, marking her path through the cabin. She looked down in mortification. It wasn't even just her shoe. The disgusting spray had reached her nyloned feet and up her shins. Tiny brown dots splattered across her legs like some grotesque abstract painting. She swallowed hard, wishing she could vanish, wishing she could rewind the last few minutes and undo the disaster she had unknowingly unleashed. Daisy threw her hand to her mouth as her stomach lurched, spinning on her heel toward the toilet behind her. There was a sign taped to the door saying "out of use," but it barely registered as she unlocked it and jumped inside anyway. And then, just as she reached out to turn on the tap, she remembered why it had been locked off earlier. It was the toilet with the vomit. The one with the sink that was brimming to the top with brownish red liquid. Colourless chunks floating on top, each one of them taunting her. Daisy barely spoke for the rest of the flight. She tracked down a cleaner toilet and managed to tidy herself up to some degree, though the smells still seemed to cling to her. Blankets had been laid over the news stains in the aisle, and after a while the cabin air dulled enough that the stench became something they could all endure. But inside Daisy's head, a battle was raging. One part of her clinging to the dream she'd once had for this job, the other forcing her to face its messy reality and wonder if it really was for her. The truth was, Daisy had grown up spoiled. The only child in an upper-middle-class family who had wanted for nothing. The salary from this job didn't matter. It was meant to be fun, something to enjoy before the next stage of her life unfolded. Mummy had been so proud, even crying when she'd been given her wings. She was supposed to see the world, make glamorous new friends, and then, when she was older, find herself a wealthy husband and settle into a country club set like Auntie Sil had. That had been the plan. But 3 flights in, Daisy was already beginning to wonder just how naive she had been. And then, when the flight was over, they disembarked, and she knew that she should have been relieved. But what the hell was this airport? Why were they being escorted by an armed guard through a dusty terminal with orange plastic seats from the last century? Where were the high-end shops and the shine of the other airports she'd been to? Why were the police surrounding that man over there and waving a gun at him? Someone shouted, and she picked up speed, staying close to her colleagues as they filed outside, where their bags were loaded into a trailer and they boarded an old minibus that groaned under their weight. And then, as they drove off, she noticed the lights of the security vans in front and behind them, sticking close to their vehicle as if they were in danger of some sort of hijacking. She'd have pulled the curtain next to her to shut them out if she'd have dared touch it, but it had strange crusty lumps stuck to the aging fabric, and she'd touched enough gross stuff today. Everything told her to run. Her body was so overwhelmed that her fight or flight mode was well and truly activated. But where could she run? She was here, smelling of shit, in a place where they needed a police escort, and she had no choice but to stay. And then, tomorrow. A small cry left her lips as her mind fast-forwarded to the next day, when she'd have to do it all again. But she couldn't. She couldn't possibly do it again. Not ever. They pulled up at the hotel and fed their bags through the security machine before walking through to the dated lobby. Daisy looked around at the beige carpets and shabby furniture, the knot in her stomach tightening even more. No, she couldn't do it, and that much she knew. But how on earth was she going to get out of it? Well, Daisy Spencer was going to do what she always did, she realised as a plan hatched in her head. She was going to call the one person who always knew what to do. The one person who always had her back and never made her do anything she didn't want to do. She signed the sheet and took her room key, following the others over to the lift. Her mind was already dialing before she reached the door. Daisy Spencer was going to call her mum. And, well, we already know what she told her, don't we? The Red Eye podcast is written by Kaylee Kay, narrated and produced by me, Ali Murphy. These stories are based on true events, but certain details, characters, and timelines have been altered to protect the innocent. Visit our website, theredeyepod.com, to subscribe to our newsletter and to find out details on how you can contribute your story for us to turn into an episode. If you enjoyed listening to our stories, please like, subscribe, and review. Thank you. Our author, Kaylee Kay, does an incredible job of taking these true stories and turning them into fun little episodes for the Red Eye podcast. But did you know she's already written 6 novels, and they are amazing? So if you want to read those, visit Amazon and search for Kaylee Kay, and I'll put a link in the show notes too.